So here's the didactic part. Didactic. That's your new word for the day. So, abuse. So today we're going to do like abuse and definitions and dynamics. So we'll start with definitions. So what are we talking about when we talk about abuse? All right, so how do we define abuse? So if you look it up in the dictionary, abuse, you're going to get a bunch of different definitions of it. And I'm actually going to use one that you're probably not going to find. I'm going to define abuse as a situation when you violate somebody. So it's a violation. So you can violate people physically, punch them out, emotionally, call them names, intellectually, label them, socially, like embarrass them, and spiritually. So there's like these, like 5 different categories we can say of abuse, so we'll get into each of these. And it's all a function of violation. So I'm violating you in some way. So why would I do that? Why would I run around violating you? I mean, what's the point of abuse and to begin with? I mean, why would I do that? All right, so one of the ways of saying, like the why of it is it has to do with control. All right, what is control? Control dynamic means that if I'm going to control your behavior, I need to give you a list of the shit I want you to do or not do. Then I set up a reward punishment system so that you get it done. That's control. And it's neutral. So if you have a job, then the list is your job description, the paycheck is your reward, you get fired, that's your punishment. So control is neutral. Okay? Depends on how you use it. That's also true with abuse. It's neutral. It depends on how you use it. So if cops come up and handcuff me for beating up somebody, that's a violation. If you ever had handcuffs on you, talk about a violation. You feel like a piece of meat, it's like, ah! It's like, but it's appropriate. You follow me? It's appropriate because the cops need to control me because I'm out of control, blah, 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 blah. So it's abuse is neutral, depends on how you use it. It's also true with violence. So violence is another one of those hot button issues, or hot button terms. So violence, we can define that as an explosion of energy. That's like one of the definitions, like a violent volcano eruption or something. So again, it's neutral, it depends on how you use it. So one of the first problems that we're going to have when we talk about abuse stuff is what are we talking about? Is it appropriate or inappropriate? Is it sanctioned, by the law, or is it illegal? So it's like so it's I have to be critically thinking right out of the gate. Cops have problems with this. One of the few states that deal with it appropriately, as far as I'm concerned, is in the area of domestic violence. So the cops get called out in Portland, Oregon, and they show up and they can't figure out who's the perpetrator. They arrest both. They arrest both people. Right, so they don't assume one was, the perp and one was the victim. It's like they don't know, so they arrest both people. Because one of the things that it's like, and we'll get into this in a minute, but I had like one of the guys that I worked with years ago. He's driving down the street. He and his wife got in a big argument. She starts hitting him, and he's trying to get her to not hit him while he gets over to the side of the road, so they're going to get her a wrap. Right, and so he ends up with a split lip, bloody nose. He called the cops, right? But he grabbed her arm. Guess who went to jail? He did. Yeah. So, and then even the court ended up like having him go to anger management. When if what he was telling me was true, and I don't have any reason to say it wasn't, he was in a place of self-defense. It was abuse, he grabbed her arm, but it was, from one point of view, an appropriate thing for him to do because it kept them both from getting into a wreck. So yeah, it's a weird sort of place, you know, when you start talking about abuse and abuse dynamics, you know, well, okay, first, was it appropriate abuse or inappropriate? Was it legal, was it not legal? Was it okay, was it not okay? Spanking kids. I mean, I grew up getting beat with, you know, like razor straps and coat hangers, you know. Was that abuse? Absolutely. You know, it's like, but, you know, like, what is it now? I mean, it's you know, kind of the cultural norms, you know, are different, you know. Like I had a woman, Samoan, you know, that the husband was trying to get custody of the kids and basically said she was an abusive parent. And they sent her to see me to do like an assessment on whether she was abusive or not. I had a bunch of police reports and, you know, OCS reports and all the rest of it. And essentially, within the Samoan culture, she was not abusive because it's much more physical. You know, in the Samoan culture, you know, not to the point of bruising or anything else, because it's a much more physical, you know, form of parenting. And so if I look at it from a cultural point of view, let's say no, it wasn't. If I look at it from, you know, like a purely sort of, you know, like whatever white point of view, it was. So how do you call that one? And so essentially that's how I called it. You know, from the culture she grew up in, this is not abuse, and she is also doing anger management and parenting training. So I suspect, you know, she will become more compliant with the cultural norms that are here. She ended up keeping her kids, but it was an interesting dilemma. You know, like, okay, abuse. It's a tricky one. Violence, tricky one. You know, it depends on how you use it. Because the purpose is control, and control is neutral. All right, so again, it's like, we'll make one more step with it. When is control appropriate? Well, control is appropriate when you have a hierarchical system. So I'm the boss, you know, and you are the employee, then control works fine. If I'm the parent, you're the child, control works fine. If I'm, you know, the teacher, you're the student, control works fine. If I'm the sergeant and you're the private, control works fine. When you have a hierarchical system, control is probably the most efficient way of getting the business done that you're trying to get done. And if you ever raise kids, you know, it's like one of the things that you figure out fairly quickly is that from basically grade school, say from 5 until like 10 or 11, control is the best way to raise children. You know, here's the list, here's the reward, here's the punishment. Right? The best way to raise kids. If you come in and go, okay, children, what would you like to do today? You're going to have a train wreck. You know, it just does not work. What we're doing today, children, is X, Y, Z. Are you ready? Yeah! It's like, okay, here we go. Control is wonderful. All right, when you have an egalitarian system and you introduce a control dynamic, you got domestic violence. Period, the end. You know, it's like, who are you to give me a list and tell me what I should be doing? Yeah. So when you have an egalitarian system, the control dynamic will not work. You have to use a different dynamic. And we'll get to that in session 4 of this class. Like, what is that dynamic? You know, it's like, it's assertive, it's conflict resolution, it's, you know, it's a different language altogether, and a different organization, and how you organize your thinking, it's a different organization altogether. it's more respectful, it's a bunch of stuff, right? So, okay, you got that? Okay, so that's the overview. All right, so when we define this more explicitly, so we'll have the emotional abuse, and we see that, we look at that as on a continuum, right? So, and it's, in the handout, it's like one of the first handouts that's there, the continuums of abuse by Nichols and Purdy, and they came up with that back in the late 1970s, and it became pretty much the standard when we looked at abuse dynamics, you know, and so it's expanded since then. I mean, it's evolved. I mean, that was like 1979, so it's been a few years since it's been around. So there's been an evolutionary sort of thing that happened with this. Because you'll notice there's 4 continuums: emotional, sexual, physical, and social. And so those 4 continuums, I'm adding to it with spiritual, you know, and whatnot. So there's, you know, but those are the ones that were identified back then with people that were working, you know, in women's shelters and whatnot, and that was like what they came up with. And it's still to this day in women's shelters, if you come into a shelter seeking refuge, this will be a part of your intake, you know, to go through the continuum of abuse and check off what you've experienced or what you perpetrated, you know, like what you've done or what you've received. You'll check it off. And one of the reasons they do it is because you'll notice in that handout, they all of those continuums end in death. So we see it as progressive. So slapping you upside the head didn't work, I better do the next thing on the list. It's progressive. Because it's never going to work. You know, me controlling you is never really going to work. So sooner or later, you're going to feel like I'm out of control and you got to up the ante, and since slapping you didn't work, punching you might. So it's progressive. And as it progresses, you know, they all end in death. So what people would see when they went through the continuums of abuse, we could show them this is how close to death you are. So it's kind of a wake-up call. It's like, hello, you're this close to death. So the continuums of abuse, the one I'm going to spend time on was the emotional abuse one, because this is the one that really synopsizes in a kind of a powerful way what the whole dynamic is all about. The physical and the sexual, they're kind of obvious, right? And they overlap a lot with the emotional abuse. And so I'm not going to go into them in much detail, because going into those in detail is just too freaking gruesome and make you want to cry. So I don't want to do that. Emotional is bad enough. I'm going to go through emotional, but I'm also going to go through social, because that's the tricky one that we'll need to unpack some stuff with that. All right, so the continuums of abuse then are ways of organizing your thinking about the control dynamic we talked about. In other words, the abuse then is punishment in service of control. Punishment in service of control. That's our working definition of the abuse continuum, because it's more precise given the ambiguities that we just talked about a minute ago. So it's punishment in service of control. Capiche? All right. So the emotional abuse continuum. Now I'm going to kind of play with this a little bit, and you can just extrapolate from what it is that's on the handout. I'm going to say that this one starts with jokes that aren't funny. Jokes that are meant to punish. That's the low end of it, right? The way that other people that present, you know, the abuse continuums, and I actually agree with it, you know, but they say it starts with refusing to meet the other person's needs. That's how the emotional abuse continuum starts. Okay, I don't disagree with that. you know, but it's one of those weird refusing to meet needs. I mean, how do you quantify that, right? And what are needs anyway? So it's actually accurate, and we'll get to what I'm talking about and defining it, you know, in a while. But I think it's a lot easier to think about it as, oh, jokes that aren't funny, jokes that are meant to punish. Like, oh yeah, it's like, yeah, oh yeah, you're not fat anymore, stuff like that, right? So I punished you, but it's low level, right? So you got jokes, ridicule, criticism, you know, etc. And then our first major break point is going to be what's called labeling. So we got a bunch of low-level stuff here, and then we got our first major break point at labeling. All right, what is labeling? So I'm going to contrast labeling to name calling. So name calling, I'm going to say, is targeted to behavior. You dumbass, why did you do that? So name calling, I'm targeting behavior. Okay? So it's low level. Labeling, I'm targeting your essence. God, you're stupid. Get it? You are stupid. It's not behavior anymore. I'm targeting your essence as a human being. So labeling is the term we'll use in psychology to indicate dehumanization. So if I'm going to dehumanize you, the most common way that occurs is through some form of labeling. Racism, all that, yeah. Sexism, whatever you name, you name it, like essentially, once you've engaged in labeling, you've dehumanized the other person. Now, why is this a break point? Why is this important? Because this is one of the things we figured out in martial arts training, to give credit. Human beings cannot hurt human beings. That's why. Seems like we do a pretty good job of it. but genetically, we're programmed as social animals. We are programmed to love one another and work together in cooperatives for the betterment of the community. That's our programming. Our genetic programming is to love one another. Right? So therefore, in order for me to violate my genetic programming, I have to dehumanize you. That's the logic. Like, so one of the things that we'll do, like in women's self-defense classes, is, we'll talk about refusing to be dehumanized as a way of, like interrupting, like a date rape or something. It's like you refuse to be dehumanized, then you can keep it from going there, maybe. You also might have to punch them out. But it's like there's an opportunity, if you refuse to be dehumanized, then they can't hurt you. If in hostage training, if you work for the State Department or something, they'll go into a bunch of, like their hostage training scenarios is pretty much grounded in the idea of labeling. If I refuse to be labeled or dehumanized, then it's going to be more difficult for the hostage takers to kill me. And then they have a bunch of interesting stories of that happening. Like one of them was, down in one of the South American countries, this one ambassador got captured by the bad guys, and he kept joking with the guy that fed him breakfast or lunch, so he finally got the guy to actually smile. And guess who saved him when they the SEALs came in and got him? And so it was that guy, that smiled that kept, the other terrorists from killing the ambassador. It was like one of their famous stories. So humor, one way to kind of rehumanize yourself, right? So there's these ways of keeping yourself human, refusing to be dehumanized, and that's like its own sort of skill set, so to speak. Because you'll find also, like, if you're in a situation where, like in many different, like Native people or Black people or female or you know, you name it, you know, it's like, if you rise up against being dehumanized and you fight against it, you just made it worse. You just sort of proved the point, right? Whatever point they're trying to prove by dehumanizing you with labeling, if you fight against it, you just proved their point for them. You didn't, but in their mind you did, right? So it's a different skill set, you know, to not let yourself get dehumanized. And in my view, and I'm going to own that as a viewpoint here rather than a truth, I'll be I'll be pontificating all these truths and they'll be self-evident. But when I'm giving you my point of view, that's a different thing. I think humor works best. You know, if we're, you know, keeping people from dehumanizing me, I'll just make jokes about it. You know, if I grew up street fighting in Los Angeles and I got into enough scrapes, you know, down there that were racially motivated, Mexican, black, you know, whatever, you know, and it works both ways. I mean, it's like, you know, racism is pretty, you know, multi-directional. But I've had situations where I've been in a bad situation and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, oh, kick your honky ass. And I said, well, you better brought lunch because it's going to take you a while. And then, what? It's just going to take you a while. I know how to fight. And you go, really? And then all of a sudden, if the tension is broken and we can have a conversation human being to human being. Yeah. Yeah, and I've had that happen often, you know, it's like, either that or I ran. I was pretty fleet of foot back then. Okay, this is crucial. If there isn't labeling, there isn't violence, period. How do we do it? You know, we do it cold-bloodedly. You know, like most bad guys do it hot-blooded. You know, I work myself up to a place where, you know, like martial artists, cops, we do it cold-blooded. You know, I have to dehumanize you to hurt you. So when I hit, I'm gonna hit a target. I hit spleen, I hit a liver, you know, I hit kidneys, I hit a throat. You know, so we do it like doctors or nurses do it. You know, I'm not gonna stab this needle into a human being, I'm gonna stab it into your tricep. You have to dehumanize to hurt. So it's like, those of us who are quote unquote professionals, we do it by focusing, I'm stabbing this into the tricep. I'm punching into the neck. It's cold-blooded. You didn't need all that information, though, did you? Perhaps you did. Okay, labeling. So then we move down from labeling, you know, into different kinds of targeted kind of stuff and whatnot. So we get to the next sort of break point. The next break point will be isolation. All right, so one of the purposes in like the abusive system is, and we'll get to this when we get to definitions, or the dynamics of the definitions. When we get to dynamics, this will become more clear. But what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to make you be for me what I need so that I'm going to be happy. So it's like, you're going to take care of my emotional needs, you're going to take care of my doubts and fears and longings and all that. So it's like, you're the person that's going to make it all better, right? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to coax you, bully you into that. So in a sense then, what I have to do is get you to focus on my needs and defocus on your needs. So what's right for me becomes what's right for you. Where actually it overrules what's right for you, right? All right, so what I've got to do then is make sure I get you away from all those terrible influences of people that are going to tell you to look out for yourself, to take care of yourself. You don't deserve to be treated this way, blah, 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 blah. So I got to get you away from all those influences. Isolation. Barefoot pregnant on the outskirts of town isn't just a cliche. You know, it's like a part of the program. Yeah. So I gotta get you isolated. Then you can focus, you know, on only me, and then won't that be wonderful? Got it? So we get isolated. Once we get past this point, things start to go downhill pretty quickly. You know, it could take months, years, even decades to get to here. You know, it kind of just depends, you know, on the situation. You know, but like I said before, it's progressive, you know, unless there's some kind of intervention of some sort. It is progressive. Well, once we get to isolation, it's, you know, it goes pretty quickly. So the next major break point is what we call crazy making. Okay, so crazy making is a technical term. So crazy making, how does this sort of work? So if you think, the logic goes like this. I'm still not happy. We're all the way down here, and I'm still not happy. You somehow are not meeting my needs. You are not taking care of me in a way that makes me feel happy, joyous, free, and wonderful. Why? You know, what's going on? I mean, how come this program isn't working? I'm even more miserable than I was before I met you. So what the hell? You know, what's going on? You know, so so there's a certain, like, you know, tension, you know, that's built, you know, because it's not working. So what crazy making then, it sort of reflects that kind of frenetic energy. So for example, crazy making is, the simple answer is crazy making occurs when the rules change. So let's say I come home from work and you've got dinner on the table ready to go. So I come in and I go, what's this? You go, dinner, hot, steaming, 6 o'clock, just like you wanted. And I go, well, I may have said that, but it's not what I meant. You know I would like to have a beer and watch the news before I eat dinner, so get this shit out of my face. Yeah, crazy making. Even if you're right, you're wrong. Yeah, it's not laughable. You gotta laugh though. I'm just like, God. But that's crazy making. So what happens with crazy making is that you see the energy is like frantic. You know, it's like, I gotta do something. I gotta, you know, it's like something isn't right. You know, it's like, so I can't let you be right even if you're right. If you're wrong, and you're still, I'm still right. It's just like, it's all pretty crazy making. From here on out, like basically from isolation out, what's happening psychologically is happening to both people simultaneously. So it stops being, you know, a victim and abuser. We're still a victim and an abuser, I mean, that's true. But the effect starts becoming the same. I crazy make you, while at the same time I'm crazy making myself. I don't know whether I'm going or coming, I don't know what's up or down, I don't know what the hell's going on. It's just like all crazy. But it's your fault. You know, it's like, of course it is. So this will occur for a while. And then we get to a bunch of stuff happens, you know, like all at once here. The crazy making leads to like a form of existential confusion. You know, it's like, you know, I don't even know who I am anymore if it's that crazy. The existential confusion sort of leads to what we call learned helplessness. When this came out of the research, It was huge. When this got identified, learned helplessness got identified, it was huge. Because it made so much sense to those of us who are down in the trenches were going, oh, that's what's going on. Because I'm confused, so I'm just, I don't know what to do. And I'm in this place of complete abject helplessness. So what does that lead to? All the suicidal stuff. So suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, you know, and completed suicide. And that's the end of the continuum. See why I'm gonna blast through this? It's pretty depressing shit. You know, it's like, God damn. You know, but you can see it, right? I mean, it's like those of us who've been on the planet for a while, we've experienced it. We've been down this son of a bitch, you know, to the point where, you know, why should I even stay on the planet? You know, this so sucks. I just want to be done with this. Now, all right, you can see how all this overlaps, right? So if we get sexual abuse, you know, then we would start with sexual jokes, sexual labels, get it? Sexual isolation in a sense, and then, you know, the crazy making and all the rest of it sort of fits, but as well as those sexual overtones. You'll have sexual stuff that's specific to sexuality, forced abortion, for example. You know, that would be like in the sexual category. You know, but anyway, there's a lot of overlap. You know, with physical abuse, same kind of thing. Like for example, I didn't put it on here, but one of the things that is this go on the physical abuse continuum or the emotional abuse continuum when I punch a wall? So I punch the wall because I'm so mad at what you're saying.
Emotional.
Is that physical or is it emotional? Basically it's both, right? Because I'm punching. And essentially my punching the wall tells you you're next. You know, basically it's a physical threat. Right? So there's a lot of overlap. You know, things sort of blend together. Got all that? Do you want to have all that? So let's look at social abuse, because this one is actually kind of interesting in and of itself. We look at this, we go S1, S2, right? So we look at this as really two different categories that tend to overlap. All right, so the first category we're going to call social abuse, third-party abuse. Third-party abuse. So third-party abuse is going to be, so ridicule, yeah, I'm going to ridicule you in front of your friends. So an egregious form of that would be, okay, it's like, I don't know, girls' night out, right? So you're out with your girlfriends, having a good old time at the local club, and I show up half in the bag and, you know, ridicule you or confront you in front of your friends. You get it? So I'm essentially using your friends to help me punish you. Get it? Third-party abuse. Make sense? All right. I file a false police report. Third-party abuse. So I'm using, you know, the police to help me punish you. You know, in a much more egregious fashion. Now you know, you go to jail. I actually had one of the guys I worked with, he was actually Hawaiian, you know, and a boxer, you know, that's kind of how I knew him. He was a boxer in town. And he got divorced, you know, and his ex-wife was an alcoholic. And he ended up getting remarried, you know, to a wonderful woman and kids and everything was fine. but the ex-wife was kind of vindictive, and so she kind of knew what his schedule was. And when he would be alone, like the wife and kids were off doing something and he was home alone, she'd bang her head against walls and, you know, punch herself and then call the cops and say he came over and did it. Yeah. And since he was home alone, it was her word against his. He ended up going to jail. He ended up in treatment. You know, that's where I ran into him. And I ran into him, we did all the work we did on him anyway. I ran into him, I don't know, Thursday night at the fight or something, I don't know. I think I ran into him a year later. He goes, Bruce, I figured it out. I went, what did you figure out? What he did, he went down and got an ankle monitor. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, I know. So, cops show up at his door one day to arrest him, and he goes, nope, been here all night. So I said, good. You know, it's like, did they arrest her for filing a false police report? And he goes, nope. Well, that's not right. So, third party abuse. Got it? So, it's it's like, and you can see it's like, if we sort of do third party abuse and put it into like the sexual context, you know, then you have like, you know, gang rape, you know, it'd be like third party abuse. I mean, not only did I get raped, but I got gang rape, you know, so it ended up being a humiliation on a whole larger scale. Okay. Social abuse 2. Think of this as institutional abuse. So institutional abuse. So the institutions of society are actually complicit in the abuse, in this case, of women. You know, and so this is where racism and sexism and that stuff sort of it still is happening. Right? So it's lessening, you know, as, okay, so the 60s, one of the things we did in the 60s was we got a bunch of civil rights stuff passed. 70s, you know, the ERA got going and it finally got ratified completely like last week or something. But you know, it's like there's the feminist push, you know, really was through the 70s. You know, it's like when the push was really happening. And what it was going after, in a very large degree, was institutional abuse. And so they would document it because nobody was going to believe it. You know, it's like there is no institutional racism, there is no institutional sexism. Just listen to all us white guys, and we'll let you know that that doesn't exist. So in order for you to prove it, you're going to have to do some research. So 54 cents on the dollar, that was like one of the things that came out of it. So women in the same job as men are making 54 cents to every man's dollar. You know, the glass ceiling, you began establishing the glass ceiling. You know, women can only go so far in corporations and they hit the glass ceiling and et cetera, right? And so, you know, the whole idea of women are sex objects, you know, and so as a result, you know, if you are being assertive, you're a bitch, you know, but if you're a guy, you're being assertive. You're an up-and-comer, you're a hard charger. So that's institutionalized racism. So what we were finding, you know, like 70s, 80s, you know, even into the 90s to some degree, women would be going to, you know, the hospitals or whatever behind domestic violence or to churches, and the pastors would be telling them, well, you just need to love God more and forgive. Okay, good, that'll work. And then, how about Mommy's Little Helper? You know, remember that one? Yeah, that'll help you get down the road of life and put up with the abuse. Just pop, you know, these Valium and you're just good to go. Mommy's Little Helper. You know, it's like, no wonder the Stones made a satirical song about it. Institutional abuse. Right, so it still exists. it still exists as sexist, it still exists as racist, you know, and it needs to be acknowledged, you know, because it's one of the things that we need to work against. And we work against it by acknowledging it, you know, so not pretending like it doesn't exist. Okay, this is heavy duty shit. I don't want to do it anymore. So, got any questions then on the definition part? We're defining what is abuse, this is what it is. Right? You got questions on this? Or observations? Or nifty story to tell? No.
The thought came to my mind is that that seems like it's so applicable to the child-rearing parent-child relationships that were all dysfunctional because of this hierarchy of or was.
Yeah, because again, it's like, okay, one thing they said the best way to do parenting is the control dynamic.
The best way, but none of us have the best way.
Yeah, it's the best way of doing it, but then there's healthy control and dysfunctional control.
Right.
So,
right.
So yeah, so that distinction I didn't make.
I mean, it hit me that this naming and ridicule that you were talking about spousally was something that was done routinely to us as children to control our dynamics, but that was okay socially. I mean, it really wasn't. If you want to be respectful and responsible.
Okay, so, with children, all right, let's do children first. Let me just sort of do that real quick, and then we can go on to the other sort of pieces to what you're putting out there. If we start with, when I teach parenting classes, I start with this premise. These are not your children, they're God's children, and you're a babysitter. So if you start with that premise, I don't own my child, even if I'm a mother and I grew it in my belly. I don't own that child, they're God's children. I grew it in my belly. I mean, it's like, I did, you know, that's the miracle of birth. But it's God's child, and I'm a babysitter. And what is my sacred duty on behalf of one of God's children is to get it to the point where, like Jesus said in the temple when he was 12 years old, I need to be about my Father's business. I need to get them to that place where they can do their higher purpose. That's my sacred duty. Period. All right. Now, control dynamic is what I'm going to use until they're 10 years old. I can help them get there through a control dynamic. Or I can beat them into submission and turn them into, like, you know, like something else.
Right. So is that the difference between functional and dysfunctional?
The control is neutral.
Okay.
Back to that. It's neutral.
Okay.
So I can use control, you know, to create an alcoholic or dysfunctional family system. By God, yes, I can. And I can also, like, create, you know, like a loving child of God, you know, using a control dynamic as well. Because that's what works best for that age group. Okay, past 12 years old, control doesn't work anymore. You know, you have to do mentoring. You still have a hierarchy going on, because I'm the parent, you're the child. But now you're an apprentice adult, so I have to change the parenting style. Well, I don't have to. I mean, I see it as preferable. Let me put it that way. When kids, like what Anna Freud said about teenagers, you know, you get in, if you get into an argument with a teenager, you've already lost. So I want to avoid that. So I do it by mentoring, right? So I'm not going to use control anymore. I'm going to use a mentor. Basically, I'm going to let them come up with a list. Here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to grow up to be. Here's what I want to pursue. And then I'm going to say, okay, if this is what you want, here's how you get it. That's what mentoring is. All right, so that's parenting. All right, so the other piece to this is like, I didn't diagram it this way, but here you are, and you're in here in a job interview, and I'm the employer. We start off equal. So when I hire you, you agree to go one down in the hierarchy. You agree to let me order you around.
This is conscious.
I know.
Unconscious.
Yeah. I mean, it's an agreement.
Right.
you know, it's like you stand there and say, I swear to uphold the Constitution and be a, you know, good soldier in the United States Army. I'm agreeing, you know, to be abused in boot camp. Yeah. So the control dynamic then also is a function of agreement.
Okay.
And you did not make that agreement anymore in the marriage contract. Right. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, let's take a quick bathroom break and then we can get into like dynamics of abuse. Get rid of this horrible topic.